Hello.
Our story begins inside the Jedi Paraxium on Yavin 4 with a Jedi Master. Anakin walked in with his twins, and they discussed the past. Master Skywalker was relatively open with his past, but a very short time, the most defining moments of his life actually, were typically seldomly spoken about. They may have completely redirected his life, but he also couldn't bring himself to tell his students about them, let alone his own children. The twins didn't ask specifically about his past. They knew better than to do that, but they were pushing the conversation towards that unknown period of time. Padme didn't discuss it either, because she and Anakin agreed that he would be the one to reveal the truth of that topic to them. But on their walk through the Learning Academy, they stopped in front of a small pedestal, holding the mask of an ancient Jedi on it. As Anakin stopped, a flood of memories washed back through his mind. He couldn't stop them, even if he wanted. The flash sent him to something he tried to forget. His hand fell against the wall, and the children, which were in their 20s by this point, asked what was wrong. He frowned and told them both that the time was right. He flexed his metallic fingers around the stones on the structure and took a deep breath. Anakin told his children, "Our story really begins following the siege over Coruscant. Wreckage descended towards the city, sending up explosions and dispersing people. There were thousands of missing persons cases being filed by the minute, and the Jedi Council was looking elsewhere. They were worried about the corruption of the chancellor. In their hubris, they allowed Palpatine to undermine them with his executive orders for a public cleanup and preparation. Republic starships outside the atmosphere were attempting to pull debris away from the gravitational pull, but it was nearly impossible to catch everything. These remnants had been tumbling down towards the surface since the battle began. It was a stressful evening, but that stress also went towards Anakin as well. He had found something, a plant left behind by the Sith for him to discover. The tragedy of Darth Revan the Butcher sat within his hands. Anakin, during his duel with Dooku, had something thrust upon him, and it was by his choice, unfortunately. Sidious gave Dooku instructions to plant several Sith relics inside the command structure. The moment Skywalker and Kenobi entered, they were surrounded by darkness. As for the duel itself, Dooku was given instructions to take Anakin's metallic arm right off his body again, make him fight for every inch, and force him to rely on the dark side. Once Obi-Wan was out of the way, Anakin fought Tyrannus across the chamber. They cut through pillars holding artifacts. Some were lightsabers, masks, holocrons, what have you. Skywalker, instead of losing his metallic arm, was slashed across the same cheek that Ventress scarred years before. To protect himself, he whipped a mask onto his face without thinking, and the rush he felt was unreal. Revan's mask had originally been left behind on Yavin 4, split by a conflict, and releasing Revan's two personalities back to himself so that they could merge. Now though, the Sith had imbued it specifically with the darker attributes of the fallen Jedi. There were still traces of the legendary Jedi Master, but the Sith wouldn't just plant something that would help Anakin maintain his focused balance. Once the mask was equipped, Anakin fought two battles. Not only was his saber swinging against Dooku's attack, but he was seeing into the past. The destruction of Malachor V, the death of loved ones, the turmoil with Vitiate. These feelings crawled over his body and corrupted him, forcing Skywalker to utilize the dark side unlike ever before. Initially, it was terrifying, but then he recognized the sheer power. He ripped through Dooku, not even given the chance to execute him. There was no removal of hands, just a straight kill. This provided Anakin with triumph as a champion, not an executioner. He continued and freed Palpatine, saved Obi-Wan, and crash-landed half a cruiser. That left Anakin where he was in this moment, inside of Padme's residence. She had gone back to sleep after their minor discussion following the nightmares. He just wanted to think for a moment and take in the ambience of the city. Skywalker sat by the front entrance to the apartment, with the lights off and crossed his legs. In his lap sat Revan's mask. He spoke to it, as if it could respond to him, but in many ways it felt like it couldn't. His hand traced the outline of the Mandalorian design on the front and he closed his eyes. There was so much more he could gain from this device. He knew there was, and instead of confronting the Jedi for help, he'd ask this relic first, because from his perspective, it had given him the strength to kill Count Dooku. While yes, Anakin would have defeated Tyrannus at one point or another, even without the mask, that wasn't what Anakin imagined. Just a few months before, Dooku was twirling around and speedily defending himself from Anakin and Obi-Wan on Obadiah. So in all fairness to Skywalker, he had every reason to believe that the mask gave him the power to defeat Dooku. If it could award him that strength, then what else could he gain from its knowledge? He whispered to the mask that he had a need. His wife was going to die, and if they didn't save her, he wouldn't know how to live life. The mask buzzed in his hands. It wasn't audible, but the vibrations clung onto him. Slowly, he lifted the relic up and turned it around. He could see the reddish glow from the inside, and he held his breath for a moment as it slowly surrounded his face and tightened. Anakin's mind was transported elsewhere. He could see Revan killing Jedi, slaughtering Sith, destroying Mandalorians. So much power, so much strength. They were interconnected by their ability to conquest, but what about their control over the Force? Anakin gripped the mask with his metallic hand, and his whisper became an audible demand. How does he save someone from death? His mind went blank and his body slammed into the ground, leaving him unconscious for the rest of the evening. Anakin's adult children stood there with him inside the meditation chambers atop the pyramid of the Jedi Paraxium, asking what he saw during that sleep. He tapped his thumb against his thigh and blankly stared into the distance. The words he followed up with described nothing but confusion, because it wasn't his to tell. Similar to his fight with Dooku, he saw things that didn't belong to him. With his mind asleep, these thoughts, feelings, and memories were imbued into his very soul. He couldn't escape them, and his sleep turned him inside out. He recounted waking up the following morning and feeling indistinct tingling with his hands and mind. He stumbled about like a drunkard and reflected on what he had seen. Most of Anakin's dreams weren't super memorable. He might think about them for a day or so and then forget them. The few that stuck with him were visions with Shmi and Padme dying. But instead of seeing memories of Revan's life and the events that Revan already completed transpire in front of him, Skywalker saw a tomb of ice. Thousands of dead bodies lined the halls, frozen in time. Expressionless looks following him as he moved across the corridor. It never ended. Some people he recognized, some he even loved. Others were simply people that may or may not exist. These lifeless bodies were a curse. Even to this day he saw them, never really understanding if the mission or their purpose for showing themselves had ever been resolved. Anakin, after a tiny morning meal with Padme, departed for the temple. He initially planned to speak to Master Yoda about his visions, but the mask told him otherwise. Instead, he brought the relic to his quarters and laid it on his bedside table so he could return to it later that day. Anakin's time inside the temple prior to being summoned by the Chancellor revolved around fighting inside the training arena. He refined his skills but felt weak compared to what he was inside the Tower of the Invisible Hand. He was bothered by this, but continued on without spending much time thinking about it. The Chancellor planned to appoint him to the Council, and he was rejected from the rank of Master. Then, he was assigned to spy on Palpatine. This day, especially following the vision of Padme's death, was one of the worst days of his life. The sheer stress that pulled him from uneasiness to pure desperation pulled him between ranging emotions. But there was a cure. There was always a cure. Before returning to Padme's apartment for a dinner date, he confronted the mask again. He placed it over his head and demanded help. He wanted to end this conflict. The Sith needed to go. The Jedi were too corrupt. He needed to stop all of this and protect Padme. The thoughts rushed through his head, and his body twisted, forcing him to his knees as Revan's voice crept through his ears. He could feel the wrath of gentility and the kindness of the deepest cut reach into his mind. Revan gave some specific instructions before revealing holocrons he had seen during his days as a Jedi and as a Sith. The information Revan held at his disposal could change Anakin's life, and the mask, an instrument of the Sith and of Revan's past, gave him everything. It was almost too much to take in. Skywalker felt the burden of so much more than just his own in this moment of struggle. Revan's gift was light and dark. What Skywalker could and would do with it remained a mystery, somehow even to the Anakin who retold this story to his children now. His dinner date with Padme went fine, and he personally didn't recall any outbursts, even though they did happen. Instead, What filled the rest of the retelling of his experience was with the Chancellor at the Opera House. Palpatine had always been a mentor, and what he shared with Anakin was comparable to everything Revan told him. The two were interconnected in many ways, though the similarities also came from the alchemy used to imbue the mask with more darkness. Anakin never picked up on this, because in the moment, the messaging sounded different. Palpatine suggested that Anakin consider lessons from something else, because the Jedi couldn't teach him. Revan's mask positioned him to a point where he could learn from light and dark. Sidious knew this. He trusted that by giving Anakin a mask to confuse him, it would help with turning him. However, most importantly, the mask did something that the Sith Lord needed. It pulled Anakin entirely away from the Jedi Order. He did not reach out to Yoda. He never spoke to Obi-Wan about his frustrations, aside from their initial conversation following the assignment to spy on the Chancellor. Though just because Palpatine succeeded in peeling Anakin away from the Jedi to the furthest he had ever gone, it didn't mean that Plagueis the Wise was enough to make him a dark adept. Skywalker was in this weird middle ground, not the gray, but in the middle. But there was a chance for more carnage. It would come with more nightmares in the evening and Obi-Wan's departure the following afternoon. Between the visions and Obi-Wan's mission to Utapau, Anakin spoke more to the mask, asking for guidance and assistance. The mask responded with information. Unlike the Jedi, where their spirits moved on from their bodies and became one with the Force, most Sith refused to let go. Their spirits attached themselves to objects that held significant value to the individual. Revan's mask was one such object that his spirit latched onto. So Anakin was talking to a muddled version of the actual Revan, but it was the individual himself in some form. These conversations were difficult for Anakin. They came in between the most defining moments of this period of time for him, basically leaving him more confused than fulfilled. Though there was one specific conversation that Skywalker felt most confused with. Before being sent to the Chancellor's office to inform him of Obi-Wan's engagement with General Grievous, he called to the mask. Anakin was being bounced around, told one thing then another. The story of Plagueis sat within his mind. The mask was placed onto his head and he requested information from the long-gone spirit. Revan did not believe in the ability to save others from death. He thought it to be too far-fetched. He also refused to believe in the Jedi way. There was one discernible path for Skywalker, if he wished to be free, and that was to run away. Revan told Anakin to take his wife and disappear from the galaxy, allow the Jedi to run themselves into the ground, allow the Sith to be destroyed by their own greed, and he could rise in the ashes of all of it. He could take a hold of everything the Jedi and Sith learned to create his own sect of Force users, be more like the individuals that change history, not the ones that define it with failure or hubris. Anakin didn't want to abandon his friends though. He had to be honest. The one thing he feared, aside from losing Padme, was something happening to Obi-Wan or Ahsoka. But Revan was adamant that if he wanted to save what he had, he needed to leave. He recalled the freedom he received when he escaped the clutches of the Order and their Council of Elders thousands of years before. He would never know freedom until he created a path for himself without their oversight. Anakin pushed back again. What about his friend, the Chancellor? He didn't want anything to happen to Palpatine, and Revan told Anakin that the Republic's corruption would roll up on someone eventually. His concerns, the extra weight he put on himself to be this perfect being, would never see him finding resolution. If Anakin truly wanted to save Padme, then he should leave Coruscant and never return. These were thoughts that filled his mind when he visited Master Windu inside the communication room, and eventually spoke with Palpatine inside the executive offices. Anakin stopped and told the twins that the truth, the one that they likely had heard from their peers, was this. He went to the executive building with the mask on his face after telling Windu that Palpatine was a Sith Lord. By the time he arrived, the Jedi were killed, executed by clone troopers. He cut through the Coruscant guardsmen, and then he killed the Chancellor himself, defenseless in his office. He only killed Palpatine because the Jedi were there to stop Order 66. Mace and the others arrived shortly after the order was executed. They didn't know about the attack that was about to hit the temple, and they never would. Anakin then returned to the destruction that encompassed his home, and he tried to save who he could. He then closed his mouth and his hands started to tremble. Luke and Leia came to his side to ask if he was alright, and he nodded his head and apologized. They understood asking if he would like some space, and he asked if they wouldn't mind. They looked to each other, then nodded, leaving their father alone with the helmet. When they disappeared, he turned towards the mask, and he spoke under his breath. That was not the truth. Just what people believed to be the truth. Anakin remembered back to the end of the Clone War, to the end of everything. His actions, the ones that only one other person in the galaxy knew about besides himself. Padme would never tell anyone. Anakin clearly now had no intention of telling his own children. After Darth Sidious revealed himself and Mace sent Anakin to the council chambers, Skywalker went down to his own room instead. Inside, he put the mask of Revan on and spoke to his ally once again. He was scolded for not leaving, and then an idea floated by. Revan had his own sect of loyal Jedi called the Revanites. Anakin could have something similar. The Jedi had just given him the perfect opportunity to stop the Sith. He could help the High Council and earn their favorability. He could take everything from the Sith Lord's lair, wherever it was, and from there become the ultimate Jedi. The one that not only restored balance, but stopped the war. Revan took Anakin's miscalculation as an opportunity for growth. Skywalker listened and acted on Revan's word. With the mask still over his face, Skywalker departed from the Jedi Temple and arrived in the middle of a contest with Sidious. Windu and Fisto were still alive when Anakin landed, but Kit was distracted by Skywalker's arrival and died to Sidious's blade. Windu continued forward, colliding his weapon against Sidious's as they danced across the office. Skywalker rushed into the room and activated his saber at the start of the duel. Palpatine grinned, seeing the mask on Anakin's face. The dark trick had worked. Mace didn't understand where Skywalker got a mask from, but he trusted Anakin. The Jedi attacked Palpatine to his surprise. He defended himself from Windu, then from Anakin's aggressive assault. As their sabers traded blows, Skywalker swept himself around a piece of furniture, launching it at the Sith Lord. Palpatine cut through it and immediately parried Windu, but shock filled the room when Anakin drove his lightsaber straight to Mace's back. Palpatine and Windu wore the same confused expression as the Master of the Order fell to his knees and breathed his last breath. Sidious raised his weapon, expecting a challenge from Anakin, but it did not come. He lowered his saber and told Sidious that they were Sith. Why not deceive a little? Palpatine was a little surprised by this. Anakin really had him for a moment. This surprise lightened the mood almost immediately. Sidious went from fighting for his life against two powerful duelists to almost laughing because he had successfully turned Anakin to the dark side. It was a good trick too. There was a part of him that was angry, but he couldn't help but rejoice in that expression that Mace made in his last moments. It was just too perfect. He patted Anakin's shoulder and asked him to kneel, which Skywalker did, becoming crowned as Darth Vader. There was a little villain monologue about the Jedi and a civil war they would start and so forth. All of it went to say that Lord Vader's next mission was to wipe out the Jedi Order. Anakin agreed. They were simply too dangerous to be left alive. It was in this moment that the dark side from the mask was poured through Anakin's body. It became a stream of hate and anger. Skywalker couldn't resist its pull, and with that, the quest for greater knowledge. He asked Sidious if he could know the location of his lair, and Palpatine, who was preparing to execute Order 66, nodded, telling Lord Vader that the industrial complex called the Works would assist him with saving Padme's life. But first, the Jedi and the Separatist leaders needed to go. Anakin nodded his head. His emotionless expression, hidden under the helmet's gaze, left Skywalker asking one more question. Could he watch? After all of this, he wanted to know how Palpatine did it. He'd been behind the scenes for years planning this moment. Anakin wanted to be a part. The Sith Lord nodded his head with pride, preparing the executive orders and sending them out to entire clone divisions in one go. Palpatine had just given the Jedi a death sentence, and Anakin watched, doing nothing as every single clone commander acted on their orders without restraint. Vader would too. The Jedi needed to fall, and he echoed Palpatine's beliefs as each of the corresponding clone commanders executed the Jedi across the galaxy. Sidious then, when the last clone took the order, spoke outwardly towards Skywalker. He now needed to join his men at the Jedi Temple. His own operative, Grand Inquisitor, would be waiting for him. As Sidious turned his head, a lightsaber ignited into his back and exited from his chest. Palpatine heaved in confusion, looking up to Anakin, who twisted the weapon deeper and ripped it out. Sidious was dead before he even hit the floor. Skywalker deactivated his saber and placed it in his belt, before leaving the room and finding Mas Amedda to inform him of the truth. 4 Jedi counselors entered the executive office and assassinated the chancellor. He had just killed them all for having betrayed the Republic. Mas Amedda didn't believe this for a second, but when he went to the room, he saw the truth. Without the security recordings, because of Palpatine's intermingling, Mas could do any number of things. There were 2 witnesses, technically, himself and Skywalker. But because Anakin was rushing off to who knows where, the only survivor or the only witness in this entire situation was himself. He could do anything with the information Anakin just gave him. The Jedi Temple across the city was under siege. By the time Skywalker arrived at the steps, the 501st had already entered the temple. Grand Inquisitor was distracting the Jedi Temple Guard unit, and Sindralic was holding together a tiny resistance. His students were already dead by his side, and the Jedi were forming a line, but it buckled before Anakin walked into the temple. With darkness coursing through his body and an answer to all of his questions at his fingertips, Anakin acted the way he believed he should. The mask was both fueling him positively and negatively. The spirit of the ancient Sith Lord and the alchemy of the now dead Palpatine meshed together as one. Anakin, as a result, sliced through members of the 501st before they could ever identify him. His own men, the troops he served with for 3 years, died by his hand. Skywalker, with his mask, to conceal his identity, ripped through clones, identifying himself as the hero of the Jedi Order, the one who killed Darth Sidious, the one who would defend this temple. Shaak Ti, Sindralic, and several temple guards were already dead. He was the last of their leadership. His blue saber crushed through clone bodies and he found the Grand Inquisitor. By freeing up the surviving temple guards, they were given a chance to create a perimeter. It wouldn't matter in the long run, but it would suffice in keeping the youngest of the Jedi alive. Anakin and Grand Inquisitor clashed in the middle of the Jedi archives. It was terrifying for the fallen Jedi. He fought against a masked Anakin Skywalker, who seemed to only grow in strength with each clash. Their duel carried them towards the restricted section, and with the thrust of his hand, Grand Inquisitor was thrown into the vault door, shattering it open and breaking his body with the impact. The door to the archives opened up, revealing cube-like structures where every secret of the Jedi Order was held. Grand Inquisitor was nothing but a mangled body, dead on impact. Anakin turned to the rest of the temple and continued his defense. This calculated move provided him the chance to save the younglings. Everyone saw the hero of the Republic sweep in like a guardian angel to protect them from this clone assault. Not a single soul knew about the truth about Sidious or Windu or Order 66. They only knew what they saw. Skywalker shredded his clones, his own men. It might have hurt him or pained his heart, but this was for his future. No longer would he be forced to bend to any Jedi Master or listen to someone else's code. He was creating a destiny for himself, his wife, and his family. The Jedi, in the end, despite losing more than half of their fighting force, would rout the clones. Anakin would then direct every single Jedi to the pyramid structures on Yavin 4. He didn't really know where that came from either. He had a vision of Yavin's temple, and that's where he sent his peers. He told them that they would be safe there, far away from the Republic. He would stay behind as dozens of shuttles and transports loaded up and disappeared into the night sky. Anakin would remain inside the temple much longer. He and R2 would collect the information he desired, cover his tracks, and then cross the city to the works, where he would grab anything of value. In the middle of the night, he would arrive at Padme's residence to inform her of their change of location. Instead of going straight to Yavin, they would load up inside of her senatorial transport and depart for Mustafar. It would only be a short stop because Anakin would enter, murder the entire Separatist Council, and deactivate the droid army. Then, he and Padme traveled to a nearby medical facility on Polis Massa to let the storm bubble over and give her a chance to have a healthy birth. During the entire process, he spent time learning from the artifacts to preserve her life, in the case that she did die. It wouldn't be a total resurrection. Instead, all Anakin found were the abilities to lock a dying person in a stasis-like condition. Basically, he could preserve her life until he found the answers, but that was never needed. Everything went healthily. Thanks to Anakin, dozens of surviving Jedi and the other 90 or so survivors around the galaxy would arrive on Yavin 4 to join their brothers and sisters from the Jedi Temple. Obi-Wan, Yoda, Coleman Kaj, and Oppa Rancisis were among the survivors to make their way to Yavin, and the word they heard was Savior. While Mas Amedda in the meantime villainized Anakin by calling him the murderer of the Chancellor, the Jedi believed the truth that Skywalker told them. He informed them that he arrived in the middle of a battle, one started by the clones, ended by the Sith. Palpatine, because of his trust in him, thought that he would come and protect him, but the clones fired on Anakin and he cut them down one by one. Sidious was lastly killed by Anakin's hand. What the truth was would never be revealed. What Anakin did to Windu would never become a reality for those who survived Order 66, because he had saved all of their lives. If it weren't for him, they would have lost the Jedi Temple, and there wouldn't be a refuge for them to hide in. Though this was not the last of Anakin's antics. He may have been the anti-hero that destroyed the structure of the Jedi Order, but his emotional clarity is why he saved it. When he arrived with Padme on Yavin 4, the surviving counselors believed his story. They saw him as the chosen one who brought balance to the Force. They never could believe that he would betray Master Windu or even encourage the execution of Order 66 and watch it happen. So they stood by his side, promoted him to the rank of Master, and listened to what he had to say. Because of the Mask of Revan and the complexities of attachment, Anakin found the path towards victory. He not only told the Jedi who Palpatine really was, but he defeated him when Kit Fisto, Agan Kolar, Saesee Tiin, and Mace Windu could not. After a heroic stand against the Sith Lord, his attachment to the Jedi Order saved them from the clones. It was the Jedi who Anakin had more love for over the clones, which is why he was able to kill his own men instead of the Jedi. To the Council, Anakin had displayed what it meant to have a strong moral compass with the weight of attachment hanging over him. Even further, at the revelation of his now family of 3, the Jedi saw that he was able to choose the Jedi before worrying about Padme. Not only that, but he used that vulnerability with Palpatine to expose the Separatist Council and end the war. He was the hero, he was the chosen one, and the Elder Counselors realized that the new Jedi Order, the surviving 1,300 members, needed to learn from him. This wasn't a total collapse of power, but a willingness to learn from someone they trusted now. As Mace was betrayed for trusting and believing in Anakin, these surviving counselors were manipulated because of the trauma they faced at the hands of Order 66. And so, Anakin's Jedi Paraxium on Yavin 4 became a home to all survivors of the Jedi Purge. New rules about attachment were created as the Jedi abandoned their eons-old code. The High Council became an elder of instructors who helped raise the younglings. The thing is, if the truth ever did come out, which it wouldn't, the Jedi younglings saved by Anakin would never see him as the villain. If it weren't for him, they would have died. That's what they saw, and that's what they experienced. No matter what the Jedi Council did, even if they found the truth, the entire Jedi Order would have Anakin's back, and that wouldn't change because that's what he showed inside the temple on Coruscant. The new attachment rules and ones about forgiveness saw the Order abandoning the Republic to become a sect of independent freedom fighters. Individuals like Barriss Offee would find their way to Yavin with Anakin's help. The temple would be raided by able-bodied Jedi to protect their information, and the Republic would villainize the warmongers who started and ended the Clone War. Anakin may have been a hero, but the way Mas Amedda framed him, it turned him into a psychotic egomaniac that betrayed the Chancellor. The Jedi of course didn't believe it because Mas turned the Republic into a self-serving government, as the Confederacy crumbled without their droid forces. The hunt for the Jedi, as a result, never ended. Clones were instructed to kill them on sight, but that would be very infrequent. The Jedi did everything within their power to remain out of sight from Republic troopers. Mas would, over the years, try to emulate Palpatine's plans, but an empire would never be born. Just a furthering of the corruption started. In the present, Anakin thought back on his actions. He regretted them in some ways. He betrayed a massive part of himself to become the champion of the Jedi Order. He lied and murdered. He convinced an entire generation that he was something he was not. Padme had her own feelings about the whole betrayal, but because Anakin didn't go out of his way to murder children, she didn't blame him per se. The whole Order 66 thing was a little muddled to favor him. So to her, it seemed as if Anakin didn't really know what Palpatine was about to order. This made his defense of the temple even more defining of his character, so while she may have known technically the full truth, she could never know what Anakin felt in that moment, or what went through his mind when he manipulated Palpatine himself. Regardless, the Mask of Revan was never worn again. Anakin refused to put it on. Not out of fear, but of completion. He wanted help. Revan's spirit gave it to him. Everything Anakin wanted was now his. The Jedi accepted his family. He was able to harbor attachments, and he was the Jedi Master he always aspired to be. Most of the work the Jedi did remained exclusively in the Outer Rim, away from the former Confederacy and from the Republic. It allowed them to run mercy missions without fear of running into Republic troopers. Luke and Leia grew up accepting what their father was, and because no one would ever touch the Mask of Revan or wear it, no one would ever learn the full truth. What Anakin did was betray everything, but rebuild it in a fashion that would make the past look so terrible by comparison that new and future Jedi did what they could to avoid that corruption of the old order. The lie Anakin created for himself would haunt him in many ways for the rest of his life. But because of the great big lie, he also got to live the life of his dreams, surrounded by people he loved and Jedi who aspired to be just like the Chosen One. And that, my friends, is our story. And special thanks to the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash the like button. Let's talk about whatever the hell that was. Little messed up, little manipulative, but I might be honest, this might be my favorite Revenge of the Sith story I've done, because it's just so full of twists and turns. I really wanted this one to be like, where's it gonna go? And you don't really know until the end, and that is really the point of the story. The story is really meant to kind of drag you around. First he kills Mace, then he kills Palpatine, but then he also allows Order 66 to happen. This is an Anakin who is really kind of motivated the same way he is in canon, but he also believes that part of his power comes from the Mask of Revan. We all know that Anakin defeats Dooku no problem, but I wanted him to believe, especially because like in the Clone Wars, like season 6, Dooku was like flying around like a turbo demon. So it would make sense for Anakin to think that in the context of having experienced that a couple months before. And that's kind of why I specifically referenced Obadiah in the story, is because from his perspective, he won this fight because of Revan. He didn't execute Dooku. He should have murked him, right? And so Anakin has no reason or nothing to call back to with the execution of Order 66. He doesn't see anything wrong with execution because he hasn't really lived it. And so him betraying the Jedi and betraying Palpatine and betraying everything is so that he can become more. And Revan's spirit in the story, which is really up to your interpretation, I believe it's more of his Sith spirit more than his like Jedi persona, but whatever your interpretation is of that, this Revan individual is kind of guiding him towards what he wants, and what he wants is to escape, and eventually that just transforms into him being like, oh wait, I can have everything. I can have everything I want in one go, which is why he gets information about the works, and he goes out of his way to kill Grand Inquisitor with the door. And so Anakin is able to just portray himself as this amazing hero, even though Masameda says he's like the biggest bad guy ever. He's able to portray himself as this amazing hero, and no one's ever going to think anything of it. And yeah, sure, I'm sure someone 1,000 years down the line picks up the mask, but rounding up the story like that with a bow tie is kind of just a little simpler. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.